Now, just a little warning before we begin that there will be major spoilers in this video for the 5th episode of Loki, or the one called Journey into Mystery. So if you have not seen it yet and you don't want anything ruined, it is a really good time to click away. Okay, so let's begin at the end, which only seems fitting because pretty much the main thing we learned in this episode is that whoever is behind it all, who's behind the TVA and everything else, is hiding out at the end of time, which really isn't the literal end of time, since if it was, it wouldn't be an ongoing thing or an ongoing timeline. It would just be the end of everything, and there would be nothing. Instead, there is a giant purple cloud monster named Alioth, and yes, this is something taken from the pages of Marvel Comics, who eats everything because we also learned that when timelines are erased or when variants are purged, they do have to go somewhere. Renslayer said they don't have the ability to destroy that much matter, and they go to the Void, as the TVA called it, though I almost wish they would have called it Battleworld, or at least those within it would have called it Battleworld. However, calling it that may have been a big red arrow pointing at Doctor Doom being the one behind it all, because in the comics, and I'll go over this very, very briefly, all the different realities or universes in the Marvel multiverse were all basically crashing together at one point and destroying each other. They called these incursions. And there were only 2 realities left in the end, one of which being the main Marvel timeline, or Earth 616 as it's called. And as these last 2 realities were crashing together, or the final incursion was happening, it was Doctor Doom who was able to take away the power from those causing all this to happen, and I think they were called the Beyonders, and he basically made himself all-powerful or omnipotent. And so when the last 2 realities crashed together and destroyed pretty much existence, it was Doctor Doom who created a whole new world, taking fragments of all these other realities, basically from other Marvel comic books, and he merged them into one, and it was called Battleworld, and he reigned over it as God Doom. And if you're thinking to yourself right now, that sounds somewhat like what we've been seeing or learning about here in the Loki series, that we learned there was once a chaotic multiverse that was turned into one sacred timeline, and that someone or something is now behind it all, dictating it all. Well, I'd have to agree with you. There are certainly similarities there, though also, of course, some big differences as well. But then at the end of the episode, when we got our first peek behind the curtain, or in this case, behind the giant purple cloud monster, our first potential look at the man or woman or who knows what behind it all, we saw a castle of all things, a castle that I and probably a lot of other people immediately thought looked like Castle Doom, implying that Doctor Doom is the one behind it all. Which I think leads to the big question of, would Marvel really bring him in here and now in this series on Disney+? I would think the eventual Fantastic Four movie would be the place where we would first learn about and see Doctor Doom, or learn about him in the MCU, maybe I should say. Plus, all this time, I was kind of thinking Kang would be the one behind it all, not that he would be fully explored here and defeated here or anything like that, but rather more just hinted at, as they started to set him up as the next big overarching villain, the next Thanos-level threat, you could say. But after this episode, I'm convinced it's not Kang. I'm also convinced it's not Doctor Doom, despite the fact that it now seems that everything is pointing at him, and he's the most likely suspect if you add it all up. However, I think it's all a red herring. I think it's too obvious, and instead the one behind it all has to be Loki. Or should I say a version or variant of Loki, or maybe even the main MCU Loki who some way, somehow lived after his encounter with Thanos in Infinity War, where it looked like he was killed. And don't ask me how he would have pulled that off exactly, though if it's him, I'm sure he'll explain it to us. But we do know, or learned about in this very episode, that there is another Loki who was able to fool Thanos with one of his illusions and was able to escape him, and went off and lived alone for a very long time. And he was also left alone by the TVA until he decided he wanted to not be alone anymore. It wasn't until then that they actually came for him. Along with this, we basically learned all these different versions or variants of Loki have not exactly different skill sets, but some seem better at certain things than others. Old Loki, the one who tricked Thanos, was clearly a master illusionist, and even created an entire illusion of Asgard in this episode that tricked Alioth. Then there's Sylvie, who can charm or enchant pretty much anyone, it seems, if she was able to enchant Alioth. We also learned that apparently all Lokis have all these powers, they just don't all know about them or use them. Loki, or our Loki, or the one the show is about, was able to use Sylvie's enchantment power, or was able to unlock it within himself, whatever he did exactly. Going along with this then, the main Loki in the show even comments about how maybe he's more powerful than he even realized, which I certainly think is going to be the case. I think the Loki behind it all is going to have learned or unlocked all his potential, or almost all powers of Loki. The only thing he's going to fear then is other Lokis working together to stop him because of how powerful they can be because of combining their powers or realizing their full potential. I think the whole purpose of the TVA is basically to catch Lokis, to send them to the Void or to the end of time, where they're either killed or where the Wizard of Oz Loki, the one behind it all, can learn their powers as well if he hasn't already gotten them. Not to mention here, one of the themes of this episode, heck, one of the themes of the entire series actually, is that not only do Lokis always find a way to survive, but that they're meant to end up alone. And what better way to play off this theme than to reveal in the final episode that there is a Loki at the end of time all alone. Alright, and as for my thoughts on the rest of the episode, well, I do think it was the best and most enjoyable one overall, at least in my opinion. The series started out intriguing, it hit a bit of a lull with an episode or two there in the middle, but now it's coming together quite nicely and I'm eager to see the finale next week, where I'm almost 100% sure it is going to be Loki behind it all. That's the only thing that really makes sense to me now. Anyway, I'm still not sure about their claim that they made before the series even started, that this show would clear up any and all confusion about time travel or multiverses in the MCU, that we'd have an airtight explanation for everything. If anything, I think it's made it more confusing, though we do still have the final episode to clear things up further. Still, I'm just of the belief that time travel is near impossible to pull off perfectly or even close to it, and the more you try to explain it, the more holes you tend to poke into it. I'm also curious how things will play out with Mobius returning to the TVA, how things will play out between him and Renslayer, and I'm honestly unsure how much she knows and doesn't know. At first I thought she was sort of in on the whole thing, but now I'm pretty sure, and I think it's pretty clear, she's nothing more than a pawn herself, and I'm going to enjoy her maybe learning she's been working for a Loki all along. And speaking of Mobius, was very glad to see he wasn't dead, which I didn't think he was. I'm generally not a huge fan of Owen Wilson, not that I hate him or anything by any stretch, he's fine. But he's one of those actors who tends to play the same character over and over again. There's just something about his mannerisms, I guess, that shine through in every character he does. And though there's certainly plenty of that here, he does feel like Owen Wilson. I've still been loving his performance and his character's growing friendship with Loki. It's been one of the best parts of the show. And there's nothing I want more than to see him turn out to be literally Owen Wilson or a variant of him, plucked out of the 90s, and for him to go back and to ride a jet ski. Going along with this, Tom Hiddleston has been terrific throughout. I've loved him as Loki since the first Thor movie, and I've also enjoyed the evolution of the character here. I've enjoyed watching him take us from the Loki who lost in the first Avengers movie to one now truly capable of caring and loving others and being loved himself. I don't think this has been a perfect series by any means. I do think we'll be left with plenty of questions about time travel and multiverse at the end, but I gotta admit, I have been enjoying it. And to wrap it up here, again, I think it's Loki behind it all. I know there are a lot of clues pointing in completely different directions. I know Alioth is a big clue that Kang is the one behind it all, and that what looks like a Castle Doom, not to mention something akin to Battleworld, points at Doctor Doom. But I really think they're just messing with us. I think it's all a red herring. It's all a distraction meant to keep us from what's really going on, what the show has been all about, which is Loki and his ability to survive and how he is supposed to end up alone, supposedly. And again, I think the perfect thing to find at the end of time would then be a lonely Loki. Well, that's all I've got for you this time. Now it's your turn to tell me what you think about my theory that it's Loki behind it all, or maybe you want to present your own theory. Or just tell me what you've thought of this episode or what you've been thinking of this series overall. Whatever the case may be, leave a comment below and let's talk some Marvel. And until next time, thanks for watching.